started. I am thrilled to introduce our panel on fostering diversity, equality, and inclusion. Understanding and championing these principles is crucial for personal and professional success in today's interconnected and ever-evolving global landscape. Our panel today will offer valuable insights and actionable strategies for fostering a more inclusive and equitable future. We will also have some time for Q&A, so please write down any questions you have. Please help me in welcoming our moderator, Law Baker.
They told me it was slick, so I ain't even playing with y'all today.
And panelists, Nick Fortcamp.
Woo, 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 woo.
And Eric Pennington. Thank you all.
Woo. Okay. Oh, no, I think we're all mic'd up. Well, hello. How's everybody? Good. Well, I don't want you all to go to sleep now. You got your full bellies, so we're going to keep it interactive and exciting here. As Amber said, my name is Law Baker. I use pronouns she and her, and super excited to be here with these fine panelists here. I had the pleasure of knowing both of them before this event, so I knew that they were the ones that would have a great conversation with us here today. So I'm very excited to have them both, and I'm excited to have you all here as well. So as we said, we're going to be giving you some nuggets of information, but we want to hear from you all too. So make sure, whether you have a question or a comment or something that you've experienced in this work, we want to hear about it too. We all learn and grow from each other, so that's what this work really is about. I want to just level set. How many people feel like they have a really good understanding what diversity, equity, and inclusion is? But by show of hands. Okay, so that's about 3/4 of the room or 2/4 of the room. So I think what's really interesting is that there's a lot of mythology out there around what diversity, equity, inclusion is. So hopefully what we're going to do today is level set a little bit of that information for you. And if you remember, it's centered on humanity. If you can just start with that place of seeing each other as the human beings that we are, that we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. What did Miss Lillian say this morning? How we're the quantum, we're everything, we're the good and the bad, we're the happy and the sad, we're all of those things. And what diversity, equity, inclusion really talks about is how do we bring all those things to ourselves and know that about ourselves, and then create grace and space for other people as they're learning, and how do we work together to make the world a better place, and whether that's the workplaces that you're in or even the communities that you're in as well. And so we're going to dig into that a little bit more and kind of level set with some definitions as well as lived experiences. So are y'all ready to take this ride with us? All right, let's get it. So I'll start with Nick, since you're here with me, Nick. And so I want you to kind of give people a little bit of information around who you are and why diversity, equity, and inclusion is an important part of your life.
Oh, boy. So my name is Nick Fortcamp. Over the past 5 years or so, maybe 6 years, I've really dove into the realm of DEI and community engagement and education. And I've done that mostly through outside my professional life. Professionally, I'm a real estate appraiser for the Robert Weiler Company and do economic development, things like that. But I didn't find that DEI in my professional life. So I went out and found it. Back in 2017 or so, I really saw a need to get engaged on the DEI front, and I did. I'm not somebody who came into this arena with a lot of experience. I'm just a regular guy who just saw something and went after it, and I hope that encourages everybody else to do that. But I got involved with this program called Leadership Upper Arlington. I went through the class, and through that class, I met other people who wanted to get involved in DEI, and that is where a community organization and nonprofit, Equal Upper Arlington, started. And I'm one of the founding members of that organization, where we wanted to bring the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and being welcoming conversation to our community, which was sorely needed, especially in Upper Arlington. No ways around that. That's just what it was. So we started to go out and listen and learn from our community about their wants and their needs, and it was enlightening. And from there, that's just sprung board me, and I feel like our community, into a whole new level right now. So it's been a lot of fun. I can dive into other aspects later, but
I love it. I love it. I think it's wonderful, that experience, both that you didn't see what you needed where you were working, so you're like, how else can I figure this out, right? And I think that's a lesson for all of you. You know, I know some of you are business owners or some of you are working within companies. It may not be that you get the exposure that you need in some cases. There was a study that came out a couple weeks ago that says 91% of people have a very homogeneous social structure, and the only time that they have diversity or experience diversity is in the workplace. So that's intense. That's intense to think about. It's not in your neighborhoods, not in your home, and not in your community. So the only way you figure it out and find it out is through the workplace. And so what's interesting about that is, as we heard on our panel earlier around technology, a lot of people on social media also become in an echo chamber, right? Because you're going after things that what you like and the kind of opinions and thoughts that you have. So sometimes you have to challenge yourself is, what is the other opinion or other perspective that I'm not getting? You know, when you're in the workplace, what other perspectives are not represented on your team, on your leadership? What are those things? So when you start thinking about that, what can you do individually to be able to make that change, right? So Eric, let's talk about you a little bit. Talk to us about DEI in your life and your work.
So Spirit of EQ, we're a data and people development firm, and we're all about helping people understand the role that their emotions play and how they interact with other people, right? So I see what we do as kind of a foundational tool within that, because when DEI really kind of caught fire, which is probably the last 3 to 5 years from my perspective, there were a lot of emotions behind that. A la, you could insert George Floyd, what happened in the summer of 2020, to fill in the blank with other situations. And it was very clear to us that on the whole, not everyone, but in many cases, most people really don't understand what emotions are.
Yep.
And they really don't know how to manage them. So here we are. Hello, we're Spirit of EQ. We can help with that. And I think, though, La, your background that's your expertise to go deep and to understand some of the nuance. For us, we start here, because if I see someone from a different ethnic group, or if there's a different person from a neuro perspective, there's going to be an emotion.
Yeah.
Those emotions are meant to communicate with me as to what do I do next. And that sometimes is positive. Sadly, it can also be negative, because our brains normalize these behaviors that we've had for so long. So for us, it's really kind of the mission. And for me, though I wish every DEI consultant would call on me and say, hey, we got to start with you.
Yeah.
I realize that it is an essential part of moving it from, again, an exchange of information to behavior change.
Right. And I want to pull that thread a little bit. So, I mean, I want to ask this to the audience, how many people have ever been told you're too emotional? Listen, I should put both hands up. Like, this is me 24/7. But one of the things that I learned from Eric, and I thought it was so interesting, is that you can't have a full cognitive development without the emotional. There's the logical side and the emotional side, and both of them are necessary. Absolutely necessary. Eric, can you talk a little bit more about that and how you teach that?
Yes, La. So many hands were raised, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, our brains, if it were of that variety, our brain would laugh at us when we say, oh, we don't need emotion. Because the emotions are coming, guys. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're man, woman, in between, binary, whatever you may be. Your brain is delivering emotions on every problem and opportunity you experience every single day. So to me, it would seem that it would behoove us to pay more attention to what's happening in the emotional center of our brain rather than the logic. Now, prior to the pandemic, as a society, America was doing pretty well. Businesses were flourishing, people were working, economy's great, all the things that we say makes for a great society. And then the pandemic came knocking on our door and said, you know, that rug right there that you're standing on, I'm going to pull it out from underneath you. And that happened to every single person in this room, including us.
Yes.
So you can say, but I got up, Eric. I got my shot. You know, the pandemic kind of waned. But the pandemic created new problems and new opportunities. And they were not going to be solved or taken seriously without both parts of our brain working together. That's great opportunity. It also produces great frustration, because if you don't have the tools, if it's never been introduced to you as okay, here's something that you can practically put into practice, you flounder, you fail, your third attempt, your fourth attempt, all that different dynamic. That is a kind of the key reason for why I'm sitting on this stage and why I do this work. Because I don't think we're going back to pre-pandemic. I don't know about you, but I think that a new era has been launched. And there's great opportunity with that. I have a great deal of optimism of what could be next. It might be in the DEI front. It might be in some other front. But the idea that somehow, you know, we're going to get back to where it's logic. You know, what are the numbers? What's the process? Leave your emotions at the door, everyone. I think those days are gone.
Yeah.
So again, I see it as it's a great opportunity to begin that process of getting both centers to work together.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I think what's so interesting, you know, we talked about it with the technology panel, you know, during that COVID timeframe, the only way we were really communicating with people was through social media a lot of times, because we were alone together, right? I hope I never hear that phrase again. I'm just going to tell y'all right now. Ever again. But when you think about it, seriously, you know, everything that we were doing, we were literally looking at this screen here, this screen, or your screen on your computer, and you were honestly doing the comparison dance, right? Because that's what you do with social media. And we talked about, you know, being on the highlight reels, that kind of thing. You're like, well, I didn't start a business during the pandemic when I had a lot of time. Does that make me a bad person? You know, I shut down because I didn't feel mentally prepared. Does that make me a bad person? So there was all these different places and parts where people were feeling less than because somebody else looked like they were a better step ahead or doing something a little bit more. And that caused more of those feelings of inadequacy, right? And emotions of up and down, and why the conversation around mental health is so important now more than ever, right? And we started looking at that. So Nick, I know we talked a little bit about, you know, you thinking about that, and even as you're leading Leadership Upper Arlington, you have these leaders from the community come in and say, hey, I want to be better at this work. So when you think about being an inclusive leader, in your home, in your community, in your workplace, what does that look like for people?
A large part of that is with EQ, with your emotional intelligence. You got to understand in everybody's community, whether it's the community they live in, the community they work with, or wherever it comes from, it's different for everybody. And you need to understand, leaders need to understand that if you're having a conversation with one person, they're actually, just to dovetail into earlier this morning, the 4 directions. We, as like a compass, where there's the visionary, the more planning aspect. There's the more like bringing people together, and then the analyst. So like you got to understand people's different kind of areas that they specialize in, what they thrive in, to really get things done. And as leaders in DEI field, you understand everybody's on a different path of their own journey. Both leadership and DEI, I view it as a journey. Some of us were at a very young age, experienced it like myself, and have more, are more receptive. Others are just discovering when they go to college or get in the workplace. And you gotta make sure you're like cognizant of that, because you can't tell somebody like, hey, we're gonna go enact this DEI initiative, and we need you to do this, and we need to get these 3 things done. When that person may just been like, what just happened here? What am I trying to do here? I don't even understand what DEI means.
Right.
Then on the other end, there may be, and I've experienced this myself, I'm well versed in this, but then there's people like, this is their like passion, this is what they live, they've had so many experiences, and they're pulling.
Yeah.
And Nick, you're not moving fast enough. Nick, you gotta do more. And that's gonna happen to leaders all over. And so it's really important that when you enter in these conversations about DEI, when you're leading other people, is recognizing where they're coming from and how they respond and react to different types of kind of communication styles and asks.
Yeah, I love that you said that, and it reminded me of one of the things the panelists talked about today with the information technology is that you want to do things with people, not to them. And I think when you start really talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're talking about reframing your mind into how you are including people in that conversation. You know, I often, when I'm working with clients, you know, when we start breaking down what each word of DE&I means, it really starts to clarify things for folks. You know, when you say diversity, that just means any difference, right? Anything that's different. And you could be like a table, like I look at this beautiful table here. Y'all all have similarities because you're female. And you might all have similarities because of the melanin in your skin, but that's probably where it stops. You know, I'll have to ask another question, like, are you married? Do you have kids? Did you come from a two-parent family? Did you go to college? Were you socioeconomically stable? Like, there's so many other factors that come into what is diversity and not just what you can visually see. There's that whole analogy around the iceberg, right? You can only see a certain part on the surface, but when you go deeper, what does that look like? And how do you start to develop cultural competencies to understand that? The equity piece, which I love, the phrasing of equity, it's not equality. Equality is sameness. Equity is fairness. You can come from two different spots and two different places that says, hey, we need to meet you here. You wouldn't treat a 3-year-old the same way you treat a 17-year-old, right? You wouldn't. The 17-year-old has more time, more space, has learned more, and is able to do more than the 3-year-old. So if you think about people in that respect, not everybody's going to start from the same place, and not everybody's going to get to the same place at the same time. So you have to match what you need, people need for resourcing and tools to get them to that place. That's the equity. Then the inclusion part is making sure people have what they need and that their voices are heard. If you're looking in a room, what perspectives are not represented? Who's not there? How do I make sure that perspective gets in the room next time? Or how do I ask somebody else about what that means for them? You know, my friend Brian is in the audience, and we were talking about this earlier around inclusion is not a zero-sum game, right? There's not just clear winners and clear losers. No one has to lose. That's the point, right? You think about it like a pie, right? Who loves pie? I love pie. But the problem with pie is it is finite, right? You can only cut so many small slices. And so if somebody has a whole pie and you cut it in half and you start giving out slices, there's only so much anybody can have. But if you start thinking about inclusion like a candle that's lit, right? So all three of us have candles on the stage, but only mine is lit. If I take my candle and I lean over and I light Nick's, and then Nick lights Eric's, then we all have our flame. I haven't lost anything. I have the same, what I came in with, I have my flame, but now I've had more light on this stage, I have more warmth on this stage, and everybody has what they need to start getting what they need from that point. So if you start thinking about inclusion from an abundance and not a scarcity place, it changes the whole dynamic for you, you know? So I want to go to you, Eric, for a minute, because I think a lot of what polarizes people around diversity, equity, and inclusion is that sense of loss or that sense of fear. And so the emotions start to really rise up with that. So how do we help people understand what it is that they're fearing? How do we help people understand beyond what is the surface level?
Work with Spirit of EQ. That'd be the. Sorry, I had to get at least one commercial in today. But the reality is, I think it comes to getting at a base level to understand, like, number one, what are emotions?
Yeah.
You would be amazed at how many people don't really know what emotions are. And that's not to indict anybody's intelligence. It's not judgment for me. But we've got to get to an understanding of what they are.
Yes.
And they are chemicals in your brain. And they just happen to be communicators. Call them neurotransmitters. It's like a message from you to you. Eric, I'm trying to get your attention about this fear thing. That's what my brain is doing. What happens oftentimes is that Eric just says, I'm plowing on through. I don't have time. I mean, all these different excuses that we give for not being curious and not being reflective, those are killing us. Those two things. And I would dare say, I think that's one of the big big roadblocks to DEI.
Yeah.
I'm not curious, and I'm not reflective.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of sad when you think about it. Because maybe if I'm curious and I want to know what's beneath your surface, I will find, oh my gosh, you were in theater. Oh my, that's why you're so good at that. That's so awesome. But if I'm not curious, I'll think, well, she's just very extroverted. Well, what did I miss? If I'm not reflective, when you tell me while I was in theater, I also had these experiences in my home, and it was really difficult. Fill in the blank with the example. Oh my gosh, empathy. Wow, maybe there's a connection why your art and your experiences created this wonderful, wow. But if we just keep riding on by, just riding on by, well, guess what? Look around you, right? I have better hope, though, because I believe that there are those that want to delve into it. They want to understand, okay, emotions, they're chemicals in my brain. I think it even further lies that when you think about when you encounter a problem or an opportunity, your brain is going to release that emotion. Let's use the car analogy. You're driving on 70 West. Somebody cuts you off. You're going to feel something. Or even better yet, I'm going to utter a name for you, and I bet you there are going to be emotions that are going to flow. Donald J. Trump. Okay? Now, you could say, okay, that's a call because nobody likes him. But maybe it's a call, well, why don't you like him? Have you examined why you don't like him? Is there something there maybe you haven't been paying attention to even before there was a Donald J. Trump on the scene? That curiosity will serve you well. That's what your emotions are trying to say. They're trying to get your attention. They want you to pay attention. I believe the more that we do that and build a practice around that, it opens us up so that when we are in for example, a work situation, and we meet someone who is different than us, instead of going, I know who they are and where they're from, therefore we're good, I'm moving on, we're going to go, Salah, tell me a little bit about Seattle. What was that like for you? Did you do art? Were you in art? Because you seem like an artist. Oh, you were in theater. What did you like most about theater? How did you feel when you were on stage? You might say to me, I don't have time for that, Eric. They need to get started on their work. I got to tell you something. Your customers are going to encounter these people. If I'm not curious and I'm not reflective, what do you think your experience will be with the customer? How engaged will they be with you? How much money are they going to spend with you? Seems to me we should be working on curiosity, reflection, and that brings an understanding of, again, what emotions are, what they're trying to communicate, and then we can move to how do I manage this? Because sometimes it's not so great, sometimes it can be.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And, I think you all are seeing there's patterns from the beginning to the middle, and now here we are. The same things are being repeated because they connect to so many parts of our lives. I think a lot about the youth, right? And I'm going to come to you with this question in a second, Nick, but, how many of you know Gen Zers in your life, right? Y'all know some Gen Zers? Yeah, we have 2 of them, and our kids are 2 Gen Zers. How many people have heard very negative things about Gen Zers? About them being entitled, they're lazy, they want the world, in this, that, and the other. The interesting part about Gen Z, because, again, we have 2 Gen Z kids. That's true. So anyway, but I'm just going to say that's true. But, I mean, it's not just true. Some of it's true. But if you think back to any time that we all were young, right? We all had those times when we were learning, trying to figure out the world, and we were trying not to be our parents. At 50 years old, I'm still trying not to be my mom. I'm still telling you that. But you're exploring things. And oh, by the way, your prefrontal cortex and your cerebral brains are not all functioning until you're like 25, 26. So there's going to be times when you're learning and trying to figure things out. But there's also something I think is so beautiful about this younger generation is they're demanding to be seen. They're demanding to have authenticity and to stand in their authenticity. And we've been conditioned as the older generations to say, well, we can't do that because we've been told to leave our emotions at the door. We've been told to leave our baggage at the door. We can't bring that in. And they're like, no, 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 the bags come with me. I got a carry on. I got one on my bag strap, got a fanny pack on. All of it's coming. All of it's coming. So how do we start to learn how to navigate in those spaces? Because those are spaces as we, as the older generation, have to unlearn how we've been boundaries have been put on us, barriers have been put on us. So how do we unlearn that and learn from that younger generation to have a little more emotion about those things? And so, Nick, I know you do a lot of work with the youth. And I know they probably get a little scared sometimes about the world that is being formed and shaped for them. How do you help them understand how to use their voice and to lean into that authenticity that they need to be the leaders that they want to be?
There's a couple of things just to start out with to make sure this is effective. You need to make sure you have trust. You can't just be an adult or somebody who's older than them saying, hey, tell me what you think. And they're like, this guy's not going to listen to me. This guy doesn't care. He's just checking a box. So you got to build that trust with them. You got to be intentional about that space where you're meeting with them or they're communicating with them. It's much easier if you're communicating with them in a place that they're comfortable with. So if I say, hey, let's go meet, and we're meeting at the municipal building. So our classes are held at the municipal building. They come in, they're like, oh gosh, this is the city. This is big, this is heavy. But if you meet them at their space, if it's a place they like to go or in the schools, that changes the conversation immediately. So those two aspects, I think, are vital just to be able to start that conversation. From there, I will say if you have a chance to work with students at any level, go after it. Because the way their brains work and the way they interact and process information is completely different. When listening to this morning's panel, two things just kept ticking off in my head. We asked them ways that they like to communicate. They said, whenever we see a survey or an email with a paragraph, we will just go right past it. We will not even pay attention to it at all. And that's been the last 3 years, same feedback I've got from students. They are like people want to be, oh, we got to communicate and things like that, but they're not communicating effectively. So that's one thing that I'm hearing from the youth right now is how to effectively communicate with them. And that's something at the city level, community level, education level, we're all working on. The second is when you're having these conversations, their voices, they'll be surprised about how strong their voice is. If you just give them that space, sustainability, DEI, those things, being welcoming, inclusive, and tolerance, and it's a whole landscape, those are built in their lives. For adults, we have to kind of process, think, all right, we're gonna talk about these things. For them, that's just how it's always been. Yeah. Sustainable, environmental sustainability, well, why wouldn't we want to care about the earth? Why wouldn't we want to make things sustainable for the future? Why wouldn't we want to harness renewable energies? So they're coming at these topics at a completely different perspective than all of us. And as somebody who's listening that can create that change, you have to be able to check your ego at the door and listen and be receptive. That's where the trust comes in. And then you can take that, what they're saying, and bring it forward. What I've done is put them directly into the rooms with the decision makers. So I had students, I put them into the room with our former superintendent and board of education members. And then they got to ask any question about what's important in their lives. Then they went back, formulated a proposal, and they proposed right to the decision makers about what they want to see in their change. A lot of it's around testing, stress and anxiety. There's so much stress and anxiety in our youth right now, and it's coming from every level. One, yes, technology, and like we talked about this morning. The second is just that mental health and well-being, and keeping up with the Joneses. I had a huge trouble with that also. And when we talk about mental health, especially with them, sorry, I'm going on a little bit, but talking about mental health with our youth, it's not just stress. It's not just depression. it is social media is leading into the stress is leading into academics, the academics are leading into I'm not good enough, that I'm not good enough is leading into, all right, to be cool, I'm going to drink, I am going to use drugs. And they'll find other people who are going through the same cyclical issues that they are, and they all feed into one another. And actually, I was talking to a couple ladies right before this. We can not just poke or point out one brick on that wall, say, I'm going to fix depression and mental health in our student population or our youth population. There are hundreds of other bricks that are holding that one brick up that you need to be cognizant of and be looking out for and taking into consideration.
Yeah. I love that you talked about that piece. There's multiple levels of things, and I especially love when you're talking about trust. You know, we heard that earlier today as well. You know, one of the things that we talk a lot around is psychological safety. How many people have heard of psychological safety before? Yeah. So what psychological safety really is, do you have the grace and space to be able to ask questions, to be curious? Do you have the ability to feel like your voice matters and you've been included? Can you contribute to your environment? Can you learn in the capacity and way you need to learn? But then also, can you challenge the status quo? Because there's a lot of us can see things that are not working well, but we're afraid to say something because there might be repercussions that happen, or it might be those career-limiting moves that people talk about all the time. But you can't make things better if you don't, you talk about innovation. You can't be innovative if you don't have trust. You can't move forward and try things because I think one of the young ladies from the panel, they said, you got to try and fail a little bit to learn, right? You got to try something, put yourself out there. But if you don't have that psychological safety, you can't do that. And in a lot of cases, in environments and sometimes work environments, people are afraid. They're afraid because they think, I won't be heard, or if I am heard, I might be ridiculed, or I might just be completely ignored. So I'm thinking in terms of, one part emotional intelligence, Eric, but in another part, having what Ms. Lillian was talking about this morning about this self-awareness, this self-mastery. How do people start to lean toward figuring out that self-mastery from an emotional intelligence perspective?
I think the first thing is going to be the willingness to put in the work on yourself. It never ceases to amaze me anymore, and we work with a diverse group of organizations, public, private, and whatnot, is that many people leave themselves as the leftovers. I'll get to that later. And not realizing that that's a self-defeating approach. And I get it. I mean, we live in a culture that does not, typically, most employers are not saying, hey, remember, the first thing is making sure that you're good, that you're healthy, that you are managing all of these facets. That message oftentimes never happens. So they're left with, well, I got to be here 8 or more hours a day. I need to pay the mortgage, and on and on and on and on. So what I would say to you is not to condemn your employer, but to just get up and begin the work. Start tomorrow and dedicate 15 minutes, 20 minutes, dedicate an hour, dedicate what you can, but then get up the next day and do it again. The work that we do with our clients is that we give them things, tools, we teach them, we assess where they're at, and that's great. But not everybody is going to work with us, and for all the obvious reasons. But typically what I've found that if people will focus on their physical, a la exercise, they'll focus on their nutrition, what they eat, their sleep, and their stress, it positions themselves to be healthy, right? And then when I am healthy, I can begin to go, well, how am I showing up in the world? Have I asked law, hey, when I raise my voice in meetings, do you think that puts people off? Do I have people who won't buy my BS? Anybody, you got anybody that won't buy your BS? Now, come on now. I saw one. I'm sorry, I got somebody that I can try to run it all day long, and they'll go, that has this aroma, right? But we need that. Yep. And hopefully these are people that love you, and they will tell you the truth in a loving way. But my point within that is that that's you arming you.
Yes.
Now, what's hopefully going to happen as you rise, hopefully, your employer is going to go, wow, you've taken your numbers from here and now you're at here. Or, wait a minute, your reports are coming in a lot faster. And the error rate is really, what are you doing, La? I'm glad you asked. I think that's the pathway.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of various tools out there in which one can go to for that self-awareness. And again, that fills in the blank with media to podcasts, to books, to being here, for example, that kind of thing.
I love that. Thank you for that, Eric. One of the things that you talked about is the mere fact of, do you have what you need? I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs all the time when I'm doing my work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, because there are people and pockets in our community that don't have the basics, right? So they have a hard time figuring out how to move forward when you don't have the meals, right? When you don't have the shelter, when you don't have the safety and all the pieces and parts. So I think that's a lot of when equity shows up, because you talk about meeting people where they are and fixing, figuring out what that is, and then figuring out how to support them and get them what they need to move to the next level. So I think about what you do, Nick, too, in your appraisal work, and you're thinking about even something so simple. You think it is home ownership, but it's a fleeting, reality for a lot of people. But just even thinking about how do you help people see the basics that they need, but then also as a collective society, what do we need to be doing to make sure people can get access to those things so that the basics are done so they can springboard from that and move on to have even more life in abundance?
So this is a topic that there's entire courses on, and I will not go through all that with you because I am not that trained in that. But when you talk about access to things that they need, there's an amazing amount of things in groups, organizations, and work and investment going on working on affordable and attainable housing. So that is one, I'm going to table that discussion for a moment. There is much more needed on helping people in communities where they're at. And a lot of that, it comes down to a few things that you already mentioned, is you got to be able to have access to your services such as healthcare, transportation, good food, so transportation to employment, healthcare opportunities, so you're not going to the hospital every single time for a cold when you can go to an outpatient clinic, and you're not getting billed more and more and more than somebody else because you have access to the type of healthcare that you need. Access to good, high-quality food. That just goes right into your health. There's food deserts in our community of Columbus all around, and people can't go and get fresh produce. And it is difficult to, one, come to that realization when we have, in our community, we have that just right down the street almost everywhere we look. And you got to realize, people are, you need to think intentionally about what services you're giving. There was one more that I was thinking of that will come back to me. Education. You need to be able to have education in these communities so that they can, for betterment and for the future growth. So we all try to do things in our own communities for attainable, affordable housing and things like that. But I think our focus needs to be shifted to the communities that people love, that they know where their families are, so we don't transplant them to someplace else that they may be uncomfortable on the onset. But that comes from investment at the local, state, and federal level. That is a humongous question and issue that we're all facing. And again, just like the brick in the wall, we're not all going to be able to fix one of those without all of us continually working at different levels, in different ways, and in different areas. So it is a full shotgun approach where you need everything to be working.
Yeah.
So you need those primary services, transportation, public transportation, high quality sorry, I'm getting on my line here.
Yeah.
High quality public transportation to connect, not just to the resources that you need, but to other communities and other opportunities. You need to have that health aspect. You don't need to be paying $200 or $1,000 to go to the ER when you can pay $50 out of your pocket to go to urgent care. You need to have all those other services also.
Yeah, no, I love the collective mindset about how do we, we talked earlier about being gateways, not gatekeepers. When you have information, how are you letting that information flow to people and not gatekeeping it and keeping it to yourself? How do you help so that everybody can have what they need for survival, but not even just survival, thriving? Because I think we sometimes put ourselves at this, well, we survived that, we got through it. Okay, but why can't we thrive? Why can't we next level our lives and not just be in that survival place? So I love what you're talking about, like how do we figure out how to help with the very basics so then people know how to grow from that? I have one more question. I want to open it up to you all. So be thinking, and if you want to, lift your hand, somebody can bring the mic to you. So as we're thinking about our own personal leadership, right? We've been talking about that all day, about who we are and how we show up. I'll start with Nick and then to Eric. Like, what is one thing that all of us in here as leaders, what is one thing that we should be thinking about or can do to take our leadership to the next level by having a DE&I growth mindset? So what do we need to do? What is one thing that we can do to next level ourselves?
I had something in mind previously, but through our conversation, this kept popping up. Be brave and give grace. As a leader, it's important you may have to be the one who steps out and be brave, or you have to encourage others to be brave. And if people mess up, that's absolutely fine. I have messed up a crap ton of times, and people have afforded me the grace to fail. And you need that failure to learn and get better. Like I mentioned before, we've been doing a lot of work in our community, and there's times we've all messed up. It's like, holy crap, that did not work. That was an epic failure, or we need to fix that. And we learn from that, and we grow. And that be brave and give grace is, I think, essential to everything that we do.
Yeah, love that. Eric, please.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm on mistake 21 tonight. Right?
I love it.
I mean, I'm sorry.
There are limits now, so 20 is...
I'm just keeping it real, ladies and gentlemen, right? For me, I think it comes back to the foundational thing, Lob. And if you never see me again, this is one I think you could start doing tomorrow that could make a difference in your leadership. And that is practicing something that we call the pause. There's other versions of it. You'll hear, the idea of take a moment to meditate, on and on and on. But it goes like this. And there's some science mixed with this art, right? So the art is that I'm going to do it. I see the value in it. It could produce great results for me. The science is how your brain operates. So when you encounter these various opportunities and problems of your given day, inside of your workplaces, inside of your family units, your community, or whatever, again, like I said earlier, the emotion will come. Sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's joy, sometimes disappointment, frustration, you fill in the blank. If we can learn to give ourselves about 6 seconds as soon as that emotion comes to calm ourselves, the science is that when an emotion comes, your brain begins to release all these different types of chemicals, hormones, and peptides. So that would imply me making a decision or reacting could be really, really bad, right? So if I can find the time to pause, about 6 seconds, everybody's a little bit different, that allows the prefrontal, the executive function of our brain, to go, oh, yes, that did offend me, but the proper response now would be, could we have a one-on-one later, maybe this afternoon? Great, let's keep moving. Versus if you react while those chemicals, hormones, and peptides are flowing, guess what? Probably nuclear.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, not.
And I think if we all were honest and we were transparent, vulnerable today, we could say, yeah, Saturday evening at 7:30, I didn't wait, I went ahead and, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel the emotion, I find some way to calm myself. For me, I pray. For you, it might be meditating. I have one of my business partners whom you know, she counts the 7 dwarves backwards. I don't know.
I didn't know there was a right way to count them.
Well,
like backwards? What does backwards mean? I don't even know.
I was just stuck in, wait a minute. Doesn't that take you longer than 6 seconds? But that's what, everybody's got their thing. But if we can do that, Then the prefrontal can take its place and a great decision can be made. It'll feel clunky for you tomorrow if you have not done this before. It'll feel clunky to you the following day. It'll feel like, I don't know, but trust me in this. If you build a practice around this, your leadership will rise. It will.
I love that.
Back off that real
Yes,
quick?
you sure can.
I love yours now. And because a lot of the times, and this goes into our technology conversation from this morning and just our overarching day, is when somebody reaches out to you, most likely it's over social media nowadays. If it's a text or if it's a message or something like that. And if there's an issue, they're reaching out to you in a leadership level, they're most likely gonna be pissed off at you, or they're gonna want something or need something. And if you start continuing that conversation, one of the areas I've learned from is when you have that conversation right away, right back over social media, that isn't always a recipe for success. One of the best avenues I've seen is take that pause. Say, hey, do you want to go grab a coffee? It was more difficult during COVID. Or you can go for a walk or something. That way, I love it. I didn't know the science behind it. I just knew that it worked for me.
That's what matters. It works.
Yeah, and it just, you take that extra moment to have that conversation and everybody's on a better field. Because when they're reaching out to you, they're probably impacted directly. Something just happened.
Yes.
And everybody needs a pause.
I love that. And the pause works for marriages too, y'all. Just FYI. You might just need to pause sometimes. You know, my husband's in the room and he knows. He likes to hash things out right then and there. I said, I'll get back to you next Thursday. Just calm down. You know, but it ends up working out great anyway. So what questions do we have? Who has a question? Who has a question in here? Oh, somebody. Oh, yes, sure.
There's a buzz phrase going around about showing up as your authentic self. What does that mean, and are there boundaries? Because there are some people who show up as their authentic self, and then it's like not that authentic, right?
Yeah.
So can you kind of talk to us about that?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics, honestly, around authenticity, because I feel like this is me. If anybody has met me before today, like y'all know I'm a lot sometimes. My grandma say I'm a lot and a whole acre too, so that's all what I do. But the reality situation is that's one level of me, right? There's a level of me that I like to dress up really, really nicely, and sometimes I like to dress down and be comfortable. They're still all authentically a part of me, but what I have to realize is that in some environments, I need to be a different side of me. I liken it to being a chameleon or a caterpillar, right? When you're a caterpillar, you know, you go through a complete and overall metamorphosis, right? So one point you're literally crawling on your belly, only seeing a part of the world, then you go through a pretty traumatic transformation, and then the next thing you know, you're soaring in the air. You will never be crawling on the ground again. You completely changed. If you're a chameleon, everything within you is still the same. You just changed your outer appearance either for protection, for camouflage, or for strategic advantage. You are still who you are, but then just the outer side seems to change. So I think about authenticity being multiple levels of you. You're not a monolith in any way. So some days you might be the jeans and sneakers kind of girl, and some days you might be the full-on ball gown like your Ariel and the Little Mermaid. So that's what changes to me, is that you can still be authentically both things. You just are figuring out what's the environment that will cause for this side of your authenticity.
Well, I was going to piggyback on that. Inside of the world we operate, we have a competency that we call consequential thinking, right? It's not, we didn't coin that, but the reality around consequential thinking is weighing the costs and the benefits of the choices you're about to make. And I think that's great how you decided. I'm in this type of room. This is what and how I should play to that. Yesterday I was in a session with very conservative people. I was in dressier clothes. Did I have to do that? No. Do I like wearing dressy clothes? I gave up wearing ties when I got out of corporate America. But if that's what was needed for that moment, there's benefit. I also weighed the cost of me wearing something different would be they may not take me seriously. Mm-hmm. They may not be as diversity, equity, inclusion minded and think, well, he's not one of us, mm-hmm. right? So I think that's where the emotional intelligence comes in, is that your authenticity can sort of blossom because you are keeping it within good check.
Love that. Thank you. Nick, anything?
When you said your authentic self, I found it I was reflective for a moment there and realized like I didn't find my authentic self until maybe like 5-6 years ago. Like before, I was never honest really with myself. And I wasn't really outspoken about, like I'll be authentic right now, about alcohol abuse, about suicide, depression, anxiety, and all those things, or education barriers, having trouble learning, all those things help build me, but I always hid them. So I was never my authentic self. But I do really like the idea of you got to know your emotional intelligence, who you're going to be talking with, how to draw upon the different reserves of your authenticity at different moments. Because you're always going to, like you guys mentioned, you're always going to be your same you, but just how much do we draw from this bucket or that bucket at a time?
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Hey.
Hey. So my question is around helping forward the conversation. And oftentimes, I think I've done enough work to essentially either pause myself, or I have people in my world who will tell me, you need to check yourself. But in having conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and specifically those who are very resistant to that conversation, is there a general concept or idea that you could give to us on helping to make sure that space is safe and to allow them their process while making sure to forward or advance the ideas of togetherness and connection and inclusion?
Yeah, sure. I'll start and I'll let you all join in. One of the things that I think is really important is that I always talk about how greatness is within every one of us. You just need the right key to unlock it. I say the same thing around creating safe space conversations, because not everybody is going to feel safe to you. So they're not always going to feel like they can be their authentic self and speak. So sometimes, again, about the ego, you got to remove yourself and say, I'm not the one to have this conversation with you, but let me connect you to somebody who might be able to have that conversation with you. Because not everybody is willing to receive information from everyone. So that one part of it, I think, is to figure out, are you the right key to unlock? And if not, how do you make sure that person gets the right key? Second of all, I think it's not just enough to say this is a safe space. You have to be that. So you have to be vulnerable to a certain point to allow them to say, hey, I'm going to share this about myself with you so that you know it's okay, right? So you have to be able to be that. I talk about DEI being three things. It's empathy, it's humility, and it's vulnerability. If you can have those three things in that conversation, it will open up so many doors for you to be able to really lay the groundwork that becomes this bridge for you to make those connections that you want to make and to get people to move forward. Sometimes people are just stuck and they see this trench and they don't know how to get over it. So how do you help be a builder of that bridge to connect them so that they can get over it and make it?
I would just say learn, practice, get really good at listening. And I want to kind of qualify that. You ever had a conversation with someone and maybe after a couple of sentences you're already thinking about lunch? Or they're in for one sentence and you're already thinking, I disagree. If we can get to this place where I'm willing to listen to your story and believe you, and stealing from Brene Brown here, it's the believing part that's really, really hard. Because you may believe something that I don't believe. You may be in favor of something that I'm not in favor of. But the art of this is two things. One, you are building trust. Because most people, if they know that there's someone that listened to them and believed them, there's connection made. But if I'm listening to you and after the second sentence I'm working on how I'm going to rebut every point that you made and every thought that you had, well, guess what? This ain't very safe for me, so I'm going to, right? And it's hard work. Again, it comes back to you got to get up and you got to practice it. You have to, because even the best at listening, the temptation to, I don't know if I really agree with that, because I've been thinking about it, and I'm going to say that's sometimes default. But I believe that as we practice it, again and again, we'll get to a place where we'll understand, I'm not losing anything by listening to you and believing your story. If you believe that the sky is red, tell me more about that. How is that? Where did that come from? I don't need to judge you. Think about how much weight that removes from your shoulders by just being willing to let them do that. I think we are far too connected to the idea that I need to be right and I need to be number one and I need to win. Far too connected.
Yeah, agreed. Anything to add?
To continue on the building analogy,
Yeah.
one of the tools that I find that's incredibly helpful is to be working from the same set of facts. Because if you're not getting, for DEI, that can be a million different things for a million different people. But if you, so for housing, so there's like this idea of like NIMBYism, not my backyard, about, let's say we're building an apartment complex, and somebody's coming in and saying, theft is going to go up, drug use is going to go up, crime is going to go up, all these horrible things, our community's going to go down the hill. But if you're able to meet that person with a baseline level of facts, saying, no, the data doesn't show that. Yeah, can we just agree on a few factual things, then have the conversation? That just alleviates a lot of the gray area that you're trying to weed through and innuendo. Like let's just get there to the base level, then move from there.
Absolutely. So I think we're right around time, Katie. All right. Well, can you thank these beautiful, beautiful panelists for me today? Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Black out. So a speaker.
Yes.
Hot mics.
Appreciate you all so much for your engagement and for listening. And I know you're going to go do amazing things. So go do them. Go be your best self.